to me, some of the companies in the mid-market and the growth stage are probably most advantaged because they are willing to take some margin hit to get growth, but they have big enough distribution to actually bring some of the new AI and LLM products and services to their customers and actually get adoption with them. Their customers are willing to go wrong for the ride and try new stuff that they bring to market because they trust that brand. We serve about over 2 million businesses these days. We have close to 10 million people who use Zapier. I think empirically, the thing we set out to is where we found most of our success as well, which non-technical employees are building these automations. We offer the software at $20 a month. And the reason we're able to do that is because over the lifetime of the company, we've been able to reach customers in a very low cost of user acquisition way through search and through partnerships. And in order to satisfy a user who's going to buy software at $20 a month, the product has to be really, really good.
Hi, I'm Craig Smith, and this is Eye on AI. This week, I talked to Mike Knoop, CEO and co-founder of Zapier, or Zapier, one of the leading business automation tools leveraging AI. I've been interested in Zapier for a while, and while I tried to avoid having founders on the program, simply because there's so many and it's too early in most of these companies' trajectories to know who's going to be around in 10 years, I was interested in hearing about Zapier, and I thought you might too. So I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, YouAi. They're a fascinating company that does a number of things, but I'm most interested in their MindStudio, which is a platform for building AIs on top of large language models that you can deploy for free or for profit. Think back to the days when smartphone apps were first getting started, and if you were able to have been among the first couple of thousand people to build a smartphone app, you would have learned a lot and may have earned a lot of money. So give MindStudio a try. Visit YouAi.ai/MindStudio to build your own AI today.
Yeah, so I'm Mike, one of the co-founders of Zapier, background in engineering. I actually went to school for a mechanical engineering degree, University of Missouri, Mizzou, if you follow SEC football at all. And of the three co-founders, I have two co-founders, Brian and Wade. And of the three of us, I'm the one that gets the card of saying I dropped out of college to start the company. Though it was grad school, not undergrad. So, you have to tell me how cool that is, Craig. That doesn't, maybe not quite as impressive as it first sounds. But I actually got into sort of startup stuff through the middle of college. I had always been working on sort of side projects, self-taught programmer, did a lot of web development. I was really big in the Facebook platform when they first launched in 2009, 2010. So I was got a lot of contract work that way in building Facebook apps for sort of clients. And I got connected up with Brian. We all met at the University of Missouri. So all three of us went to the same college, though Brian and Wade are a couple years older than I was. And we all worked at the same company in Columbia, Missouri, which is where the university is. It's a college town. And it's called Veterans United. And they did basically VA-backed mortgage loans. And we all worked on the marketing side of that firm. So building communities for veterans to exist, but basically lead generation for the sort of loan generation side of that business. So we have sort of this marketing background, and I was doing a lot of the Facebook stuff, and we were doing all these very we were kind of building the same thing with all these APIs. I was doing a bunch of Facebook API stuff. Brian had been building a bunch of stuff with other third-party SaaS APIs. Wade was using all of these things. And the event that brought us all together was a startup weekend, actually, in Columbia, Missouri, the first one they ever held. And Brian was the one who pitched the idea for this, which was API Mixer. This idea that hey, APIs are really cool. They're starting to become more popular. Every business software seems like it's starting to offer an API. Wouldn't it be cool if more people could actually build with them though? We were the builders. We had we had a technical background. We were engineers. People were hiring us to build these APIs. We thought it'd be neat if you could put user interface over the top of that and let business employees who are non-technical be able to stitch together their own use cases for APIs. And so we got started with Zapier, and that was the initial thesis. And very quickly we found, I think resonance in the market and search for users who were wanting that. But that was the very initial genesis of the company, was actually a startup weekend all the way back in 2011.
Ah, and now to my initial question, how were you then? How old were you then?
Oh, so I would have been 21, probably 20 when I first met Brian. We'd known each other. I'd known Brian for about a year before that startup weekend. I didn't know Wade though. I met Wade at startup weekend. We found out we had a lot in common. We worked at the same company, but yeah, that was the first event that brought us all together. So
Yeah,
yeah, early 20s.
and so you started out as an API mixer. Does that mean to put it in sort of another, the way I think of it, as kind of an orchestration layer that people can pick and choose APIs that they want to integrate into their software, whether it's an app or something more internal. Uh,
Yep.
is that essentially what it was?
Yeah, you got the right like idea, at least broad thesis. You know, the space that we sort of built a product in is not a new one. Integration's been around for
Yeah.
decades before us, 80s, 90s. You know, they typically required integrators. They had to go hire a custom development shop. You had to bring in hire engineers, hire consultants who'd come in, look at the software, look at the tool stack you used as a business, and build a custom solution for you then and deploy it in your organization. And what we were seeing was more and more line employees were going to places on the internet, such as these like forums, community forums that were hosted by all these like new SaaS. Got to remember 2010. Like this was just
Yeah.
at the advent of like the explosion of like business SaaS software. So you could go find these communities of people online begging these early SaaS providers for integrations with other software. So I remember that startup week we sat down. We found, you know, Wufoo was this like forum software. You could find these threads on their support, their user support forums that were 100 pages long with users that were just like begging them, like, hey, can you add a Salesforce integration, or can you integrate with SMS, or can you integrate with like this other Zendesk product that I have. And these individual SaaS providers sort of are incentivized to build a few of those, right? Like if they they're smart. If they hear a lot of users asking for the same thing, they're going to go build it. And so they'd prioritize the top 1, 2, 3 native integrations and build those. But because of this, like it's honestly just like a math problem, because there's this explosion of niche SaaS software. It's sort of a combinatorial problem where like every new app that exists in the world introduces this like edge between two apps that's not going to be very popular except for like 5 or 10 people in the world.
Yeah.
And so that was our thesis, was like, well, we'll probably never be able to like compete with like those native top of the head use cases that vendors are willing to build for their users directly. But if we could build a generic platform that covered the long tail, maybe there's a big business. Maybe there's like enough of a product that people are like compelled to use, and there's a business there, which is what ended up being true.
But it has evolved, is that right? Because I don't subscribe to Zapier. I have heard a lot about it, largely from people that are pushing into your space, and and with the advent of generative AI. But
Yep.
my understanding is you're sort of an easier to use UI path that that people can build automations with.
Yep.
Is it Zapier or Zapier?
You got it. Zapier.
Zapier.
Zapier makes you happier is the
Yeah,
fun
okay. Zapier
mnemonic.
makes me
But
happier.
as long as you're talking about us, I don't care what you call it.
Yeah, but that people could build automations, putting together APIs to different SaaS offerings, uh, and there's a company called Bardeen. I've had them on the podcast, and there's a new one that I've actually been using, and I'm not going to remember the name right now. It's Pixie Bricks, and these guys, not entirely successfully yet, because you still need somebody on their end to walk you through how to do it, or
Right.
Unless you're a programmer, that allows you to build these automations using different APIs.
Yeah.
And what I've been, the big differentiator that I've been told between these and Zapier are that they are context aware. So I can build an automation that's going to read my open email and
Mhm.
compose using GPT-4 a coherent response, and that Zapier is really a trigger based platform where you build an automation that then is triggered by some event, and
That's right.
that doesn't have access to that isn't content aware, so to speak. So uh, maybe describe what Zapier does.
Yep.
If I've got it right, that is primarily for building up automations, how it differs from UiPath, and how you see these new uh, offerings, context aware offerings, fitting into the market, whether you're going that direction and that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah. So Zapier, just as like background too, Zapier, we serve about over 2 million businesses these days. We have, close to 10 million people who've used Zapier. I think empirically, the thing we set out to is where we found most of our success as well, which non-technical employees are building these automations. So we've surveyed our user base quite a bit, and about 4 out of 5 would not self-describe themselves as an engineer or developer or technical. These tend to be folks who are still builders. They have a builder mindset. They're folks who live in operational roles, sales ops, marketing ops, support ops, CS roles, management roles. Folks are sort of looking across like business processes, and kind of they're savvy enough with software that they're probably like power users of other software tools, but they don't self-describe sort of in a technical way, which is sort of the bread and butter of folks we've sort of reaches. I actually tend to like best describe Zapier by actually showing use cases. It's a very hard thing to describe generically. An automation platform. Well, okay, great. What are the types of things you can automate? I can actually probably even do like a quick little screen share and show you one of the ones that I use for myself here. This is a Zap that I have that allows folks to put emails in my inbox, draft outbox, basically to other folks on my behalf, basically.
Right.
This is one of those use cases where like it's really effective in like CS and partnerships, where folks want to make an initial connection with somebody outside Zapier, and they sort of want me to be doing the initial outreach just because they're going to be able to get a contact there at
Right.
a higher rate. This is one of those things where most people in Zapier just don't even think to do this. It's like I wouldn't even. There's such an activation energy to ask Mike like, hey, do you know anyone at this company? Can you like send this message on my behalf so I can see if I can get a response? And so I set up this Zap that triggers. I set up a little internal form using Google Forms that whenever someone fills this out, it automatically puts a new draft email in my inbox sent to the person that they want to send it to, with the body of the email they want to send, with the subject line. And then it notifies me in Slack, which is sort of what I use as my sort of daily operating system.
Yeah.
And just says, hey, Mike, there's somebody else wants to send this email. Click this link to go review it. And it gives me a chance to edit it, change the tone, make sure it's an email I actually do want to send, and isn't just something that's like not a great email to be sending to someone outside the company. And this is an example of an automation that sort of I have set up, and I like to show it because I think oftentimes automation gets thought of in like time-saving ways, and certainly there are a lot of people on Zapier who use automation for saving time. I don't have to copy and paste stuff anymore, or I can run this business process in a more automated, hands-off fashion. But I like to show these kinds of use cases too, because they're more 0 to 1. There's a lot of use cases of Zapier that just generally like it's not like, oh, did I do it easier? So like this just wouldn't likely have happened. I'm actually enabling people within our business in order to like get more leverage by having me send emails, and it gives them an idea. It's like, oh, I can actually do that. Mike's willing to send an email because he's got this sort of system in this app set up to sort of do that thing. Now, the magic of Zapier, obviously, is we don't just support those 3 apps I showed. We support over 5,000 apps. Pretty much any software you use for your business, we have integrations with. And you can mix and match and choose exactly what sort of use cases you sort of want there. And happy to talk more about concrete use cases. But yeah, that's a broad, high-level overview of just how Zapier works.
And then I would imagine that you're integrating the chatbots that have appeared since ChatGPT. And can you talk about this context aware as opposed to trigger function that others are talking to me about?
Yeah, I think the like main thing I've seen folks, because we actually have about 50 AI native apps, including OpenAI, ChatGPT, Bard, Claude, Anthropic, Replicate, Hugging Face. There's a bunch of apps that are on Zapier now that we have integrations for. And we've back in March, we actually sort of called a bit of a code red moment for us. We kind of realized, wow, that language models are going to have a really, really significant impact on automation. In fact, I think to the extent that like this term of AI and automation are sort of like mode collapsing into the same thing, and AI is winning. Like clearly, that is the term that business users are starting to understand in terms of like, oh, software that can do things for me on my behalf, which I think is pretty cool. So we've seen a lot of users start to prototype and bring language models into Zaps, and we've pushed our internal teams to try and discover those. Like if we want to be able to help our customers figure out what to use AI and automation for, we got to be able to be good users of it ourselves. So I've gotten like a really good close-up look at like how folks are starting to bring out language models into automation steps. And I think the biggest one is that there's a bunch of new capabilities. There's probably two main things. One is there's a bunch of new capabilities language models offer in a workflow that apps today or workflows or even code don't offer because they're extraordinarily rigid, right? You can think of like writing a Zap, building one of those automations is almost like writing code in the sense that it's fragile and rigid. Like it's very prescribed to the exact trigger, the exact action, and the exact way you want to map data from that input to that output. And if anything changes, there's a good chance that Zap's going to break, or that code you wrote is going to break. It's quite fragile. It's not reliable or flexible. That's where language models get really, really cool. Is they are able to be a lot more flexible in terms of like where they can sit in the middle of workflow. So oftentimes we'll see folks insert language models in the middle of these steps in order to do like summarization, text feature extraction, identifying, like, let's say a good example would be like take a unstructured lead form on your website where someone just writes in a paragraph of text about their problem. You want to be able to pull out the relevant features of that, say like their name, their phone number, their problem, how important is the problem, maybe even assign a priority to that lead. And then you want to put that in a structured format, maybe inside Salesforce or in a Google Sheet or inside of a Slack message somewhere that's going to go out to a team to kick off a process. And that's a problem that's like basically intractable with like historical like deterministic code or even Zaps up through a year ago. Where that's something language models do a really, really good job of is sort of taking that unstructured content coming in through a workflow and extracting, summarizing, doing sort of sentiment analysis on top of that. And then being able to have that structure to kick off some sort of internal workflow where the structure is required or necessary to do that thing. That's how we're using it largely. I'd say that's the head of the use case as well. And inside Zapier is, and we just get, at this point, volumes of unstructured user feedback every day, either from, sales calls where those have transcripts, or from, Zendesk issues where we get thousands of new issues a day, or from product surveys that we send out on new features where we're getting raw feedback from customers and users on new features we're releasing. And being able to have language models sort of analyze, extract features, and even apply like sort of time analysis to that by saying like, oh, okay, here's the like top 3 issues from today. Here's the top 5 from this week. Here's the longest running issue from the last 30 days. And then being able to raise priority or bump priority by sending that to the right place inside the company is one of the biggest, most general use cases we found that's giving us a lot of value for AI right now.
Yeah. So going back, you started as a platform for integrating APIs into software. And then you moved into being able to build automations or build software by putting together these APIs into a stack. Where is the AI for Zapier within that process? First of all, I mean, is there AI in that? And then and now you're integrating external generative AI models into these automations. And is our business process automations the primary use case, or are there other applications that people are using Zapier for?
Primary business automation, internal automation is like the biggest one. A lot of times those do lead into external use cases, especially when you're touching a customer somehow, right? Where you're either collecting information from a user or a customer, or maybe sending them an email or a notification or message in some way. Folks do have like, I kind of think about that as just like the ends of, a business process or a workflow that you have set up. There are some actually cool use cases I've talked to customers over the years. And this is actually one of the things that gave us a lot of encouragement to build some of these native first-party tools. Like we just launched a native tables product and a native interfaces product on Zapier a few years ago, where you can actually build front ends, light front ends. We actually have our own sort of data storage mechanism as well, where we saw people that were using Zapier beyond business process stuff. They were using Zapier to prototype building products. There was this one that stuck with me from a few. It was probably one of the first ones I saw, which is like why it stuck in my head so much. That was called Seinfeld Text. This guy built a website static using like a static website generator, maybe even like a Weebly or something like that, just to host this. It was a front end with a Stripe form on it. And the website had a phone number and a Stripe form. And you typed in the phone number, you paid $5, and it would, the idea was kind of like a little bit of a prank website. It would like send a random Seinfeld quote to this like phone number, like one every hour for the next 24 hours or something like that. And it was like a college student or somebody right out of college building this like fun little thing. And he was like making some legitimate money, like a few $100 a month from this thing. And the entire back end was entirely on Zapier. There was no actual code. He never wrote it Latin code. It was just like one of these, self-serve website builders plus Zapier doing all the logic, get all the quotes in like a spreadsheet, it plucked it out and used Zapier for the logic writing and stuff. And we've had quite a few users who've done really cool stuff, like where they start prototyping products and businesses sort of using Zapier, because it's an easier way to get started and actually show, hey, is there value here? Should I go hire an engineer to rebuild this? There was another story I talked to a founder who I think it was called Halo Cars. Yeah, his name was Kanan. And it was a startup out of New York. They were doing the taxi advertising on the advertising on top of taxis. Mm-hmm. And they had a really heavy driver onboarding process where every time they, a new taxi rider said, hey, I'd like to put your hardware on top of my vehicle. They had a big intake process where they had to vet the driver and evaluate whether the car was good enough for what the signage was, and, meet them and sign all the paperwork. And it was, a very manual, high touch process. And for the first few people, he obviously just did it totally manually as he's building the process. But then he immediately switched it over to Zapier to do all of the backend automation for that entire process. So he didn't have a human managing it for himself. Zapier was sort of basically his proof of concept for his business. And I think within less than 12 months, he had sold the company to Lyft. I think he still works in the head of their media now at Lyft. So some really cool stories like that where folks go beyond just, it goes beyond the time saving, right? That's somebody who's going 0 to 1 on sort of an idea or doing something that they otherwise sort of wouldn't have felt capable of doing. And those are typically the folks that I like. Yep. I get most excited talking to because they're usually the most passionate and excited about what they've been able to accomplish with Zapier.
But going back before the generative AI integration, what was the AI within Zapier, or was there no AI? Was it really?
Yeah, there's sort of two ways language models get used on Zapier today. The first is we have customers bringing them into workflows themselves, right? So that's kind of the use case I was talking about for us, where we do customer feedback summarization and feature extraction and route that to sort of an internal notification store somewhere in the company. That's us as just an end user of the platform picking off the shelf and saying, hey, I'd like to use this OpenAI completion step in the middle of a workflow in order to do something. So that's classic Zapier, but plugging in this new language model or AI capability into the middle of a workflow somewhere. The other place we're starting to explore, we have some examples of betas on our website around, is actually using LLMs to help people build and discover use cases for Zapier as well. I think this is actually one of the things I'm most excited and frankly bullish on. We've been at this problem for 10 years. How do you sort of let non-technical folks effectively build code, write code? That's kind of what Zapier does if you sort of abstract it all away. And we've been at that problem for 10 years. I'm proud of the progress we've made. I think we've reached more people than I thought we would at the very beginning of the business. 10 million folks. We've reached a lot of folks with this sort of paradigm. But I do think that we're hitting diminishing returns on how many people can you reach by just blanketing kind of nicer user experience and error correction and sort of easier setup over the top of just traditional rigid deterministic sort of software and code at the end of the day. That to me does feel oh man, we are hitting that diminishing spot where I just don't know if we're going to be able to get to, say 100 or more, 100 million more users with sort of that paradigm. Language models are the first thing that I've seen in a long time that I actually think offer sort of a step function increase in the amount of people that can actually take their squishy idea and business problem that's in their head, which is generally who's coming to Zapier. Usually most users who show up to Zapier's door have some idea of the problem they want to solve. It's usually not totally blank slate. They know what tools they use. They know the problems that they're trying to solve for their business or their team or themselves. But they have trouble then learning, okay, how does Zapier work with triggers and actions? And how do I map my business problem or my problem into Zapier? And then I have to learn the software and build it myself, right? There's these two really important moments where folks tend to get dropped off. And language models address both those things. It can help you translate that unstructured, loose idea in your head. If we can get that at least out of your head and on paper and in a text box, we can translate that into things that Zapier can and cannot do. So it can show you, okay, here's what Zapier can do. We can solve that, and here's what it would look like. And then once they're like, great, that sounds good, we're using language models to ease the setup process then as well. So we can drop a user into a workflow that's entirely configured and entirely set up where they just need to turn it on. Or I think in the ideal world, they don't probably have to even deal with some of the complexity around building and setting up. It just feels like, okay, so click this button, it's turned on, and that's it. So we're using language models to actually assist in the top level of setup and monitoring. I call it the workflow lifecycle. As well.
And that's a lot of people are doing that, sort of bolting on this conversational interface. So with Zapier, instead of again, I haven't used the platform, but instead of dragging or dropping or trying to figure out the order in which you stack APIs or that sort of thing, you just state your goal in text through a conversational interface, and then does Zapier build an automation for you, and then you work from there, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the betas we actually have on our onboarding experience, is basically exactly what you just described. It's essentially an AI bot that we have grounded in a bunch of Zapier use case data. So we have millions of use cases. We know what successful Zaps look like from the last 10 years of experience. So we ground sort of these bots in those use cases, and then use the list of apps and the user's role, what company they work for, and match those up with use cases that we've seen to make recommendations. And then we drop them into a setup process where the scaffolding is already done for them, so they don't have to start with a blank canvas, like kind of what I was showing you on my use case.
Yeah. And do you have something? I've used a product, and I've had them on the podcast, called Accio. I think they have a Zapier integration.
Very possible.
Yeah.
With 5,000 apps, I've lost track a long time ago.
No, I don't expect you to remember the specific one, but they're a no-code platform where you drag your structured data in, and drop it in, and then it analyzes the data, and you decide, you pick columns within the data, for example, that or you train the model, and then you tell it what you want to predict out of that data. I actually used it for horse racing. I did an article.
Nice. And pretty classic DNN use case.
Yeah, and it worked pretty well, except that, of course, most of the picks were the favorites, and you can't make money by betting on favorites because the favorites don't always win. And then I lost access to the data. I really would like to go back and do it, and then just bet on the long shots that Accio predicted would win. And I think because those pay higher returns, that over time I would make money. But it was really just an experiment. But do you have access to predictive models like that through? Does Zapier itself have predictive models, or do you have access to sites like Accio? I imagine, as I said, I think they do have a Zapier integration where you're building something and you want to predict, revenue going forward, and that's one of the APIs that you pull into the automation.
Yeah, there's we actually have built an app called Lead. I think it's called Lead Parser by Zapier. It's one of the more popular built-in tools that we offer, where one of the common use cases around that business users often have, especially in marketing and sales pipelines, you want to qualify leads when they come in, or if you just get an email from someone, you want to be able to hydrate that email address into more relevant details, and ultimately make a prediction score about how likely is this person to buy something from us effectively at the end of the day. So we've got a tool that can do that. You can put lead score in the middle of like a pipeline where you collect an email address and get a score of like, all right, how good is this customer for my business? There's a few products that I know of on Zapier. Mad Kudu is another one that does a very similar thing, where you actually can like train that. It's essentially doing lead scoring, but you can train it based on like buying signals. So you could actually associate email addresses with like Stripe checkouts or PayPal purchases, and they'll start building their own predictive model to say, oh, okay, these types of people at these types of companies tend to buy at a higher rate. So like, let's give that lead a higher score essentially. So yeah, we definitely have some folks doing some really cool use cases around prediction stuff, typically in like lead management use cases.
Yeah, and your space is getting crowded. I mean, you guys are one of the big players. I mentioned UiPath. I'm sure you're not eager to talk about competitors, but from people that have used Zapier, one of the advantages I'm told is it's a lot easier to use than UiPath. You need less coding knowledge. But how do you see that market evolving, particularly with the injection?
Well, maybe I'll start with this. Like, I think one underappreciated innovations of Zapier is it's fundamentally like a business model innovation. We offer the software $20 a month. And the reason we're able to do that is because over the lifetime of the company, we've been able to reach customers in a very low cost of like user acquisition way through search and through partnerships. Mm-hmm. And in order to satisfy a user who is an end user, a line employee of a business, a prosumer who's going to buy software $20 a month, the product has to be really, really good. So I actually think Zapier, when I think about Zapier's business and product, I tend to think about it more as like a consumer business than I do a B2B business, even though most of our users are in use cases are in a business context. But the way that we tend to think about sort of Zapier from a funnel standpoint is like, we're reaching a lot of folks, millions of folks every single month. How do we like shepherd them down the funnel through finding a use case, getting that turned on, and sort of working for them? That's like getting them to the, okay, my first task's automate, because that's what I haven't done anything useful for you if we don't actually automate something. So like, I think it's underappreciated just how much like how different Zapier's user is than almost every other company that focuses on automation. Like, I don't think I'm not aware of another one outside of outside of anybody who's like focuses on sort of the and has made as much dent with the user segment we have, largely because the ease of use of the software and the price point we can offer that. So it's always to reach this like underserved segment of the market, I'd say, and still underserved. When I talk to our users about alternatives, most of our users don't have alternatives. It's not like, oh yeah, I put Zapier up against these 3 or 4 other options and I chose Zapier. Most of our users like don't have an alternative. They're like, I just didn't think I could do it. I'm not technical. I don't have a budget to hire an employee. I can't hire an engineer to go do this stuff. Like, it's very much going from that 0 to 1 for them in sort of their business or their team, as opposed to, I've got a bunch of options out there and I'm picking the sort of best one for my sort of business at this point.
Right. Except that with generative AI, that's changing, because you can go on, you don't necessarily trust ChatGPT, but you can go on Bing and say that you want to build an automation that integrates, these that does something, and it'll give you that step by step.
Even better, they'll write code.
That's
right. Also a very impressive capability.
Yeah.
That's effectively what Zapier does. It's like translating a user problem into code, and we're hosting it and running it for you.
Right.
I mean, think about it as code.
I haven't fiddled around with it recently, but my experience in having an LLM write code has not been very successful for anything of any complexity. Maybe that's getting better, or maybe there are, and if you know of some, I'd love to hear about
They're
them.
really good at writing glue code, which is what Zapier is. So there's definitely a lot of overlap in the types of code that users would try to build or write Zapier for with it. So I've definitely seen some examples that are pretty impressive. I wouldn't say they're at human level yet, but you give another turn or two on models, and I think you'll sort of be there.
Right. So given that, how
Yep.
does Zapier compete when suddenly everybody who has
Well,
access? Yeah.
I'll tell you this: like, you throw away any forecast about our business before 18 months ago. I honestly believe like Zapier is either going to figure this out, and we're going to be one of the folks that helps bring that new paradigm to tens of millions, hundreds of millions of more actual customers and users, or we're going to decay into irrelevance. And I would really like it to be the former. So we're going to try our darndest to sort of like help folks figure this out. When I this is what I've been spending my entire summer on, is like going and talking with a lot of customers and trying to figure out, what are you using AI for? What aren't you using it for? Like, what are your blockers? Cut through the hype, basically. And the thing that I see is like, there is a huge awareness about AI, language models, ChatGPT, OpenAI amongst business users. Actual adoption of real use cases is like less than 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
It's really, really, really low.
Yeah.
And that, to me, there's like this huge like gap in understanding, what can I use the technology for? What you have to learn what it's good at and what it's bad at in order to pick the problems that you have to like say, okay, I'm going to go solve this one, but not this one, or I'm going to try and solve this problem with the 60% completion, because that's all that sort of technology can do these days. So I think there's like, one of the things we've been really focused on is like, okay, can we sort of help be a shepherd for our users and customers around navigating the sort of problem space of what can the language models do, what can it do, how do I actually get that set up and turn on for me and my business, and actually start getting me ROI and like positive benefit. I think everyone has this uncertainty of like, who's AI for, who's going to use it, what use cases is it going to sort of emerge from. And I think we started to figure that out after we have over close to 50% of our internal employees use AI and language models in daily workflows now.
Yeah.
So like, we're starting to lean on our own expertise and like usage to help our customers figure that stuff out. But candidly, yeah, I think like we have to try it. Otherwise, I do think we will likely decay into sort of irrelevance. Other folks will catch up.
Yeah, that's interesting, that whole question of penetration and dissemination, or dissemination and penetration. And technologies generally, there are the early adopters that get very excited, and then the general population, whether it's business users or the public, take a lot longer to really start using the product. And but that said, I mean, for example, the internet took a fairly long time for adoption. I was at the New York Times, and
AOL in 95, Google in 2004, right? Like,
that's right.
Almost a decade.
That's right. And did you say AOL? Because I was going to say that. I mean, that's kind of the caution. I mean, they made a lot of money, but AOL made it easy for my mother to use the internet. She didn't have to think about it. There were no confusing DOS codes or pop-ups or anything. And people hung on to that for a very long time. My older brother still has an AOL email address, which is, really dates you. But
I was an AIM user for a long time.
But
in fact, there's a funny anecdote. AOL Instant Messenger was one of the first apps, like one of the first 10 apps we built on Zapier. For a long time, it dominated because we had our apps sorted in alphabetical order on our homepage. Like, AIM was like the top left app, which was just sort of hilariously naive in retrospect about like what people actually wanted to use automation for in a business context, and we were like promoting AIM as the like top left corner. But yeah, it definitely has holds a spot in my heart.
Right, but the as the adoption of the internet and other browsers and products made it easier and easier to use, it eclipsed AOL, which became kind of a dinosaur. So that's what you're talking about, irrelevance. You have to, you're early, but you have to innovate in order to stay at the cutting edge of that adoption. Is that right?
It's interesting to think about the AOL cuss about. I haven't done a lot of thinking on like how did AOL come to get replaced. You'd think that they should have a lead, like, or like still should be relevant at this point, like given how much dominance they, at least in the US, like internet space.
Yeah.
And like it does seem like Google basically replaced them, right? Like there was this transformational shift in the maybe amount of information that existed on the internet and what people actually wanted to use it for, and Google figured out how to like serve that user need in a way better way than AOL did. But like, boy, does it seem like they sort of some definitely something surprising happened there, in terms of like how they sort of lost the lead that they did.
Yeah.
But I do think it goes to show that like that story of like, you know, startup to finding success, massive penetration, massive traction, rest on your laurels, don't continue to innovate. Like that's like the story as old as time, basically, in terms of like why startups even can find wedges against big incumbent players. There's like a lot of natural just forces sort of working against them in a lot of ways, legacy momentum and customers nonetheless. But yeah, I definitely think you have to like find weird ways to continue to innovate over time, over decades, if you want to keep growing. Actually, internally, I actually wrote I actually spent some time on this. I have looked at companies that have continued to find sort of like decade on decade success in the cloud software industry. Mm-hmm. So, and I try to separate them into companies that to be a little spicy, take like some strong opinions on this and say, here's like a good set that have continued to find decade on decade success against mission. Here's ones that didn't. And the ones in my good list are probably ones you'd agree with, things like Atlassian, Salesforce, things like that. On the bad list, I had things like GitHub and Slack. And you might say, well, those companies exited for billions of dollars. How could you argue that those are sort of not successful? But if you look at like their sort of total, you look at their total enterprise value, which is a crude proxy for sort of mission success, but it's the best one we probably have, so let's use it. You see those companies basically flatline a few years before they ultimately got acquired by Microsoft and Salesforce in both their cases. And the reason why they couldn't continue to get independent sort of success, and it was because they couldn't like reach more customers. They had to get brought into these bigger distribution portfolios in order to like reach more end users. I've done it. I went and did an analysis. If you like set these companies and just look at their homepages side by side, set the GitHubs and the Slacks homepages against the Stripes and the Atlassians, us, and just side by side. There's one really, really obvious thing that stands out, which is the like GitHubs of the world and Slacks of the world. They have one product and they sell features. That's how they talk about themselves. It's a singular product. It's a singular thing. And here's all features we support. Whereas if you go look at Atlassian and Stripe and HubSpot, they sell products. They have made room in their like brand architecture, their like understanding of who they are, to make space for them to be able to deliver multiple products and services to the world. And now, obviously, those are like unevenly allocated, right? It's like, yeah, they probably have 2 or 3 of the best ones that are all the money makers, and the rest kind of aren't quite as successful. But like, they had to try. That's the reality around like startups. It's like you have to try a lot of different stuff to like find the one that works. And that's what most stands out of, I think, is these companies that continue to find decade after decade success just keep finding ways to push new products and services that are useful to the world, and it shows up in sort of the homepages.
Yeah. You mentioned early in the conversation sort of a combinatorial explosion. I just wrote a short piece for Forbes about that, about business users are overwhelmed and soon to be even more inundated with new offerings as
yes, all these. I've heard that all summer.
Yeah, because everyone's busy.
There's a billion AI startups.
Yeah, that's right.
And actually, there's this question of like, will AI startups win or incumbents will win? Like, how will the value be distributed across that spectrum? Here's my take, or what I'm seeing so far is I think startups are going to have a really, really tough time because they're undifferentiated enough,
right?
And they don't have distribution advantage, so they're not like able to get these footholds. In most consumers' minds, there's just too much noise for them to make a smart selection, so it paralyzes them. They don't make choice.
Exactly.
And then on the largest incumbent end, the Googles of the world, the Microsoft of the world, they take a huge margin hit on deploying AI. Effectively, AI is margin destruction for a company like that, and that's why they've sort of been as slow as they have. Probably Google to name the most. It's because one of the reasons they've been as slow as they have to start deploying this stuff is, particularly in the search cases, is like that's their moneymaker. So like even 1%, 2%, 3% loss in sort of margin there is a really, really big deal. You're talking tens of billions of dollars. So I think you're going to see like slowness and sluggishness on some of the largest end. And to me, some of the companies in the mid-market and the growth stage are probably most advantaged because they are willing to take some margin hit to get growth, but they have big enough distribution to actually bring some of the new AI and LLM products and services to their customers and actually get adoption with them. Their customers are willing to go wrong for the right and try new stuff that they bring to market because they trust that brand.
From the consumer's point of view, though, how do you deal with that paralysis? Or what would be your advice? And I'm a consumer, and Zapier is a good example. I've heard a lot about it. I've heard a lot about Pixie Bricks. I've heard a lot about Bardeen. I've heard a lot about UiPath. I haven't really put my toe in the water on any of them because it's just I don't know which one I should. I'm busy. Anyway, yeah.
I mean, I in my experience trying to tell people and teach people about Zapier over the last 10 years, it is nearly impossible to talk about it in the abstract.
Right.
You almost, I have to go into the concrete. I have to ask you, Craig, well, what's the stack for your business? What tools do you use? You use like the Google Suite, Gmail, Google Sheets? How do you keep track of your sort of podcast leads? How do you track, and like start going down that line of thinking? Right. And I'm sure if I spent 10 minutes here, I could probably find you a use case for Zapier. And I bet you'd be excited to be like, oh, I should go check that out. That's great. That is honestly like the only thing that I've ever found really works to get folks like hooked into the concept of like, how can this tool help me? Like I got to connect it with a problem that I have. And I think that's why most of our customers, the most high intent ones, the ones that are the most successful using Zapier tend to come in through avenues like partnerships and search, where they have a problem already. Like I'm trying to connect these two apps together. I know what I want. I'm already at a point where I know what I want, and it's a problem for me, and I want to solve it. But yeah, in the most general sense, I think it is very tough to like, especially in a consumer context, talk about like, this. Even AI kind of reaches this a little bit too. I see this a lot when you talk with folks who are trying to explore and use ChatGPT. I think this is one of the reasons penetration is so low on actual use cases for it, is they're given this like sort of magical black box. And sure, the like friction's a lot lower to start interacting with it, but like what are the use cases? What can it actually do for me? Like one of the anecdotes I've heard this summer that most folks are discovering is that prompt sharing basically is one of the best ways that they self-discover or they discover how to use AI and language model technology like ChatGPT. Is they have coworkers, friends, websites where they're just seeing what are the prompts other people put in that are working, and they get inspired by that. That's probably that's what I'm empirically seeing it. So I don't know if that could translate that into prescriptive advice, but that's what people are telling me as far as how they find these things.
Yeah, well, and I would imagine, the way I see things developing, if we're so early days, but in 10 years, AI automation is going to be second nature to most people. And your day is going to be filled with interacting. Certainly people in the knowledge economy, their days will be filled with interacting with different automations.
I would be surprised in 10 years if it's not an assumed skill set in some way, like, or at the very least, an assumed skill set for the best employees. You'll certainly have employees that sort of haven't figured out how to use the technology super effectively for themselves, but I think you're going to see more stratification amongst the folks who have learned how to adapt the technology and accelerate themselves. It's just you'll start seeing a bigger and bigger gap sort of separate there. That's my instinct at this point.
That's it for this episode. I want to thank Mike for his time. If you want to read a transcript of this conversation, you can find one, as always, on our website, EyeOnAI. That's EYE-ON.AI. And remember, the singularity may not be near, but AI is about to change your world, so pay attention. That's it for this episode. I also want to thank our sponsor, MindStudio by YouAi, which is giving creators the opportunity to build and deploy generative AI apps for profit. YouAi has an emerging AI marketplace, and MindStudio is the best way to build apps with generative AI. Anyone can do it. MindStudio uses conversational language to program incredibly powerful AI tools. No coding knowledge is needed to start your AI business today. Check them out at YouAi, that's YOUAI.ai, and start building your AI app today.